As I was thinking about this topic of thoughts and how you create your world with your thoughts, I thought about the first time I met my wife. We were both giving keynotes at a conference at Kripalu Center up in Western Massachusetts. At that time, I was president of the of Kripalu Center. It was winding down, but we had a conference called East Meets East. It was yoga meets Buddhism. So I was on the yoga team, and she was on the Buddhist team. And I didn't really pay too much attention to the conference or who was there. I had never really heard of anyone, but at one of the staff meetings we met, and there's this really great connection. And so whenever any one of us would give a keynote, all the other presenters would sit right up front. So she was giving her keynote and was leading meditation. And so I was sitting right across from her, and during the meditation I was thinking, she is really hot. Like, I wonder if she's available. And then my mind started fantasizing a little more, like, she's a really attractive person. I really like her. And then I thought, I'm meditating. What am I doing? And then right then she said, and whatever thoughts are there, just let them be. I thought, okay, I guess I'll go with this. So that was my sign of green light. And I think the moral of the story is not all thoughts are bad. I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about four things, kind of a little bit about the nature of thinking, and a little bit on how repetitive thoughts calcify into beliefs, and how investigating beliefs can be quite a transformative inquiry. We'll do a little practice with that. And talk a little bit about your relationship to thoughts. Some thoughts are kind of out of control, but you do have some control over thoughts. You do have some ways you can incline the thinking mind. And finally, to talk a little bit about who are you beyond your thoughts? If you're not your thoughts, then what exactly are you? And how does that come into spiritual practice? How do we contemplate that and work with that as a spiritual practice? There's a word in Pali, the language of the Buddha, called papancha. And the word papancha means proliferation. How one thought tends to lead to another thought and then to another thought. And how if we're not really mindful, we tend to just get caught into that stream of thought. So last week, I found a tick embedded in my stomach. And we have 2 dogs, and this is the season when the ticks are going crazy. They know it's all over, so they're latching onto anything they possibly can. And I've been around dogs for most of my life, and I pulled lots of ticks off my body, and it was a big tick, so I wasn't too worried. It's the ones you can't see that are the ones you really need to worry about. And so I kind of I pulled the tick out, and then it was really itching a lot. And then one afternoon, I was just particularly tired, and I thought, maybe I have Lyme's. And then I thought, my neighbor has Lyme's. My neighbor's had Lyme's for 2 years, and her life has been wrecked. Maybe I should get checked for Lyme's. But my insurance really, really stinks. Damn those insurance companies. And I just went on and on and on. All from just one little tick. It's an interesting thing to see how the mind tends to kind of go wild particularly around fears or anxieties. It was Mark Twain who said, the worst things in my life never actually happened. We have this way of hallucinating all the terrible things that can happen to us. There's a tendency for the mind to fixate on what's not working. As my friend Rick Hansen said, how positive thoughts and positive memories are like Teflon, and how negative thoughts and negative memories are like Velcro. You know, we just go to them. We fixate on those, and then we add to them. And if we don't really pay attention to the thinking process, we become completely identified with our thoughts. We simply can't stop the chain of thinking. And one of the main blocks we talked about last week is being caught on the hamster wheel of worry, where we're just recycling again and again and again without any resolution. And that's what the mind does. So taking refuge in our thoughts is not so skillful, because our mind is very, very shameless in terms of where it goes and what it thinks. Of course, the main antidote to being lost in thought, the interrupt, is the very, very essence of the practice. And as simply as I can think of it, it's about shifting from the cognitive to the experience. Noticing when you're lost in a thought form and bringing it back to the here and now. And of course, when you really start to pay attention to your mind in meditation, we begin to realize that the mind just doesn't stop thinking. It really doesn't stop. And so when you are practicing a concentration technique, such as the body scan meditation or using any particular anchor, your mind will be hijacked again and again and again. And the essential teaching is, when you notice that, it's the moment of noticing such a key part of the practice. The attitude in your mind when you notice. We tend to beat ourselves up for forgetting our anchor and getting lost in thought. But the other way of looking at it is to celebrate that you just woke up. It's a hard thing to remember, but actually waking up out of the trance of thought is pretty miraculous. How many times during a day do you actually disengage from the thinking mind? It's not that often. It's why oftentimes we talk about how in mindfulness of building in little rituals to help to sort of stop that, it's kind of interrupt the thinking process. We kind of call them mindful moments. When the phone rings, sort of train yourself in a Pavlovian way just to take a breath. You build in a little ritual. I think I'd shared it before. I'd mentioned this when I taught at the World Bank, and there was one manager who got so inspired he moved his phone to the other side of the room. So when the phone would ring, he had to answer it. He had to get up and mindfully walk to pick up the phone. It sounds kind of cool. I think it'd be pretty irritating after a while, but the little ways we can remind ourselves, they really make a difference. There are some mindfulness strategies, I believe I had mentioned here as well, but some traditions talk about doing longer meditations. There's real benefit in really pausing for an extended period of time to really slow down and practice this shifting from cognitive to the here and now. Other traditions say that actually it's much wiser to build in those mindful moments. I always like to quote Lama Surya Das, who grew up in Brooklyn, so he kind of talks with a Brooklyn accent, and he says, when it comes to meditation, you don't want to do prolongies, you want to do quickies. So it's a helpful strategy to find some way to shift from thinking to the experience, because whenever you begin to slow down, you begin to recognize that a lot of your thoughts are repeats, that there's kind of the top 10, oftentimes on intensive retreats. We sort of go, well, what are the top 10 stories that keep coming around and around and around? after a certain point, you begin to believe your thoughts a little bit less. And in that, there's a little bit more freedom, a little bit more space. So when you think a thought over and over and over again, it hardens or it calcifies into a belief. You can say that a belief is nothing more than a thought that you've thought many, many, many times. And we live much of our life confined by our beliefs. My mother used to say that in our family, we weren't good at math. And that was a really convenient way for me not to even try at math. Because I believed it. I'm not good at this, why should I even try? I remember once as well, someone said, when I was a kid, someone said, everyone seems to like you. And I thought, well, okay, I'll believe that. And so I started believing that everyone liked me, and that created a reality as well. I sort of lived into that reality. So when we really slow down and begin to practice self-observation without judgment, when you begin to see the habitual thoughts that come by again and again and again, inevitably you will begin to recognize certain beliefs that play through again and again and again. And investigating those beliefs can be literally mind-blowing. I was recently in a dialogue with someone who was talking about working through a process in her life. She had some really important decisions to make. And she said, this is going to be really, really hard. And I said, do you mind if we slow down and investigate that? And her situation was very, very difficult. No question about it. But she said that with such certainty. So she was open to investigating it. And we explored 4 questions. If you're familiar with the work of Byron Katie, her work is just amazing. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we explored, and then we'll try these questions on for something you might like to investigate. So she said, this is really, really hard. And this is going to be really hard to go through this change I want to go through. And I said, okay, well, is that true? And she closed her eyes and she said, yeah. Everything in my life that I've ever experienced says, this is going to be true. This is going to be hard. So I said, okay, if I could just nail you to the wall here, do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt, absolutely, that this is going to be hard? And she thought about it some more, and she said, yeah. It took a little while. And then I think I said, would you bet your firstborn child? I mean, we really had to take it out there. But she said, well, I don't know absolutely, absolutely. But everything in my experience says yes. I said, okay, all we need is the 1/10 of 1%. Maybe, maybe not. So I then asked her, what's it like when you think that thought? What's it like when you believe that it's going to be hard? Now, this inquiry is an important one to really take in to what it truly feels like. Because it's not just an intellectual stance you have when you believe something, but your nervous system aligns with it. Your nervous system holds that thought. So as she began to describe what that was like for her, there was tightness. There was a very, very deep, deep, deep sadness that she had felt for a very, very long time and just did not want to touch into. Her whole life strategy was about avoiding that feeling of sadness and dread. So we spent some time with that because it's very, very helpful to really get Again, the translation of vipassana is to see clearly. To see clearly, what is your life like when you believe that belief? So she really saw this, that so much of her life was a strategizing to avoid that sense of dread and that sense of sadness, that sense of feeling alone. And this led to the next question, which is kind of the liberation question. And I asked her, who would you be, or who are you without that belief? And so she closed her eyes, and her system sort of shook, and she said, terrified. I have no idea who I would be without this belief, because it's so much a part of who I am. And so we hung out with that, of just sort of recognizing that and holding that with kindness and with compassion. And for her, it wasn't a huge insight where everything fell away and her life purpose opened up in front of her. But what it was really tasting who she would be without that belief, without that thought that repeated itself who knows how many thousands of times, that life and this is going to be hard. So in this inquiry, you identify something that is between you and feeling free or feeling happy. And it takes some rigor to really investigate what's the core belief? Like, what's the belief here right at the nub of it? And then to ask yourself if it's true, to really reflect on what it feels like inside when you believe it, and then who you are without that belief. What happens is we completely can reorient a sense of who we are, just to even taste that belief no longer having a grip. So if you're open to this, why don't we do a little reflection? I'll offer these questions and give you a little bit of time just to reflect for yourself. So with your eyes closed, you might just take a few moments to connect with your breath. You might like to go through the files. Maybe something that happened today or in the last week. Somewhere where you just felt some kind of upset, some sense of separation. And if you need a few more moments to come up with something to investigate, just raise your hand if you need a little more time. Okay, we'll take a little bit more. And then again, if anyone needs a little more time to kind of come up with an incident or a reflection. Okay. And so let's take a little bit of time to really bring this to the forefront. And some of us are visual. You might find it helpful to sort of visualize the scene. Can you visualize if someone is there in the scene with you? The time of day, the quality of light, any colors. If you're auditory, you might recall any words or tone of voice you associate with this. And you might find it helpful to turn your attention to the kinesthetic, to what it feels like inside as you reflect on this experience. And you might actually ask, what's it like at its most chronic? Just to help you kind of get a sense of where you feel that inside. And just reflecting now, what is the core belief? What are you believing about yourself or about this situation? And take a little time here. And if you have a sense of this belief, just sense for a moment if this feels accurate. And you might ask yourself, is this belief true? Do you absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is true? And even if there's just a slight crack in the wall, you may believe it 99.9%. And then turning your attention to the following question: what does it feel like inside when you think this thought? What's it like inside when you believe this? How does your nervous system, your body, hold this belief? And again, you might ask, what's this like at its most chronic, when I believe this is true? And as you explore the following question, as best as you can, sense what it feels like, what this resonates like inside. Who are you without this belief? Who are you without this belief? So gently deepening the breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open, or you can remain with them closed. So I hope in some small way that might have been helpful, just as a kind of a technique for stopping and investigating a belief. And there's a little more to that process where you sort of reflect on, if it's not true, is there any evidence that might support that it's not true? That's a very powerful continuation of the investigation. But anytime you can pause and just ask yourself, what story am I believing right now? You begin a very interesting process of disidentifying from the mind, and reinforcing a sense of who you are as the witness or the observer of your experience. Thoughts become beliefs very, very quickly. And just a quick review of a little Buddhist psychology, a little Buddhist yogic psychology of the kleshas, that much of our suffering is basically built on what we call a false belief. In Sanskrit, the word is avidya, or wrong knowledge. And it's the belief that you are separate. And in that belief, there is usually a sense of there's something wrong with me. And based on that belief, you then develop a character structure around that. You inevitably, if you believe that, then you start looking for evidence that proves that it's true. And then you develop a list of aversions and attractions, and the longer that list gets, the more the fear of death becomes part of your life experience. Because if you've invested your entire life into this belief, and you have to give it all up, wow, how terrifying. So when we investigate thoughts and the power of thoughts and the power of beliefs, it's possible to find some space and some freedom in there. Sometimes in very small, very pragmatic ways. When you think, boy, this next meeting is going to be terrible, you just pause. Well, do I know that to be true? Well, what if it's not? It opens up new possibilities. So in a very pragmatic way, investigating beliefs can be helpful. And in terms of reality, it's a very powerful investigation as well. So much of our life is run by thinking. There's a wonderful quote from the Buddha, which you may have heard, and I'm on a roll now. I'm trying to get the things the Buddha actually said. I don't know if there's some very interesting websites out there that say like what the Buddha really said is one. The other one is like, what the Buddha really said, because there's so many quotes out there that are attributed to the Buddha, and he never said that. There's actually a little statue of him with a little caption that says, "I never said that." So this may be familiar to you because it's one of the most popular quotes from the Buddha. But this is hypothetically what he actually said. I mean, someone translated it from Pali. It's two parts. The mind precedes all mental states. If with an impure mind a person speaks or acts if with an impure mind a person speaks or acts, suffering follows him like the wheel that follows the foot of the ox. If with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows him like his never-departing shadow. So basically, when you speak out of anger, out of hatred, out of ill will, it's pretty much a guarantee that suffering will follow you like the wheel that follows the ox. And when you can speak from a wholesome state, from kindness, from compassion, from love, happiness will follow you like a never-departing shadow. So what he's pointing to is how you create your world with your thoughts. It's a little daunting. But when we really slow down and investigate our thoughts, it's quite a powerful process. Just to stop and ask, is what I'm believing true? I was in a conversation with someone recently who lost his job. It was wrenching. And I asked him a question, which really was not meant to be cruel. But I asked, so what's good about this? Or what could be good about this? And a long pause. And he said, I'm going to get my life back. What I found so powerful about that question, when I could ask myself that question, his thoughts were all going down one railroad track. This is horrible. I'll never find another job. I'm going to run out of money. No one's going to hire me. But by redirecting his mind, what's good about this, or what could be good about this, his mind went down the opposite direction. Well, I'm going to get my life back. I'm going to be able to spend some time with my family again. I'm going to be able to think about what I really, really want, which I haven't had the time to do in the last 10 years because I've been so tied into this job. It's just an amazing thing. There are 5 problem-solving questions that I've found so helpful. I think I've shared with them before, but when you're really stuck, to ask yourself, what's good about this? And you have to be prepared for the first response, because the first response is always nothing. But if you hang out long enough, you reframe the situation. And then you ask yourself, what's not perfect yet? And what that question does is it forces you to begin to conceptualize what would be more ideal. It shifts you from the negative to the possibility. The next question is, what are you willing to do? to resolve this. And again, where you direct the mind, it eventually will move. Creative possibility is going to arise. The next question is, what are you no longer willing to do? And I love that question because there's usually some passion and some anger there along the lines of, I am no longer willing to live this way. And that's going to be a very, very powerful question. And the fifth question, how can I resolve this and have a great time doing it? That one's a real kicker. But again, if you hang in there long enough, very interesting creative possibilities can arise. So we tend to view through this filter of our thoughts. We tend to believe what we think. We tend to believe what we believe. Mindfulness is the practice of self-observation without judgment. And when it's possible to pause and examine your thoughts, examine your beliefs, and without judgment ask, is what I'm believing true? It opens up some new possibilities. I ran across a great poem by Thich Nhat Hanh. You may know that Thich Nhat Hanh is gravely ill. He's been in intensive care for a few weeks, brain hemorrhage, and recently the news is a little more cautiously optimistic. But he's in his late 80s. He's coming to the end of this incarnation. And this is just a short poem that I saw as yet another beautiful way of reframing through the power of directing thoughts. So if you'd like, you can just close your eyes for a moment. This is just a few lines. But you might bring into mind someone with whom you've had some conflict. Perhaps someone you felt a little separation from. And Thich Nhat Hanh speaks beautifully about what he calls interbeing. How much of our experience as humans is shared. And as you reflect on this other, you might just let his words just flow through your awareness. It's entitled, You Are Me. You are me, and I am you. It is obvious that we are inter-are. You cultivate the flower in yourself so that I will be beautiful. I transform the garbage in myself so that you do not have to suffer. I support you, you support me. I am here to bring you peace. You are here to bring me joy. The most powerful way we can incline the mind, that we can shift the mind away from tight constriction, is through the realm of gratitude, through the realm of kindness and compassion. Whenever we pause and simply reflect what we're grateful for, things shift internally. I wanted to close just for a few minutes on where I think all this practice points to, which is the inevitable question we always come to in any spiritual practice, which is the question, what are you? Buddhism teaches of the aggregates, the components that sort of make up who you are. You are form, you're the body, you're the senses. You are comprised of sensations, everything that arises out of the body will fall into the category of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Who you are is the perception of this, the conceptualization of what arises out of the realm of form and sensation. Who you are is the mental formations, kind of the stories that arise out of that. And who you are is the consciousness, the sensitivity, the awareness that arises out of that. The more you slow down, the more you shift from the cognitive to the here and now in the body, this ultra simple practice. Anytime you pause from the thinking process and come back to the here and now, you disengage from identification with thinking and you reinforce who you are as the witness, who you are as the observer of your capacity for self-observation without judgment. When you ask that question, who am I, or what am I, and you reflect internally, it's very interesting to try and find where awareness is. I thought we might close with a short little reflection on this inquiry. So as you close your eyes, you might take a moment just to turn your attention to this realm of form. Feel the points of contact between the body and the chair. The sense door of sound, of touch, taste, and smell. Reflecting on the aggregate of sensation. In this moment, what can you identify as pleasant, as unpleasant, and as neutral? And can you sense the arising of the aggregate of perception? That within your consciousness which perceives. The formulation of thought. If you are not this body, if this body is destined to fall away, if you are not these senses, if you are not the thoughts, can you locate who you are? An interesting reflection on this vast space of awareness can be a reflection on sound. Noticing the sound vibrations around you. Can you imagine the silence behind the sounds? The Buddha said, in this life, nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. In these final moments, as you contemplate that, in the absence of I and mine, can you imagine the vastness of presence? And within the vastness of awareness, you might sense as well the infinite, immeasurable state of the heart, of kindness and compassion, of joy and equanimity. And in the vastness of all of this, I'll close with these few short words from Thich Nhat Hanh. Drink your tea slowly and reverently, as if it is the axis on which the world earth revolves. Slowly, evenly, without rushing toward the future. Live the actual moment. Only this moment is life. And gently deepening your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Thank you for your kind attention on that rant on thoughts and beliefs. May you and your beliefs have a wonderful evening together. I did want to say just a few things. We do have tea, so if you want to practice that tea thing out there, that's there, with mindful cookie eating as well. If you'd like to be on the email list, you can sign up in the back. Thank you for your generous support. And I mentioned last week that I'm going to be shooting a TV pilot this week. And so I was watching my beliefs around this. And I believe I'm going to have fun. And actually, I thought, and I wanted to say this before I went, that I will be thinking of you on Thursday night, because it's just such a pleasure to share in your kind presence. So I will be calling on your presence when I'm doing my thing, whatever that thing is on stage. So thank you. Enjoy your cookies and tea, and I'll see you next week and let you know how the taping went.